So this afternoon's presentations are going to start with a presentation on green investing, or green investment, or green financing. So I think in this morning's presentations, a number of different times there were references to all the things that need to be done and how much it's going to cost to get them done. And there are a lot of different ways to address that. It doesn't all just have to be, federal grant funding or saving up for it until you can afford it yourself or things like that. There's a lot of different ways to approach this. And we're fortunate today to have a couple of folks who can discuss some very creative ways to fund the kinds of projects that we need to do a lot more of in the next few years to try to get ahead of the curve on emissions. So I'm going to start with Professor Ben Vivari, who is going to be moderating our panel discussion for us. He's an adjunct professor at the Hood College School of Business, where he's taught courses on sustainable investing, social entrepreneurship, and organizational management at both the undergraduate and graduate levels. He's also the founder of Till Investors, where he works with small and medium-sized organizations to help them invest sustainably. So I'm sure that he's going to have a lot to contribute to this conversation as well as we move forward. So thank you. Please welcome Ben.
Good afternoon. So this is going to be a really interesting discussion. You will notice that there are only two people sitting over there. Unfortunately, Lynn Heller was unable to make it, but that just means that we have a little bit more time to enjoy our two present guests and their excellent insights, and maybe a little bit more time for discussion. And so let's get right to it. Our first speaker is going to be Deborah Carpenter. She is the Director of Planning and Permitting for Frederick County. She is a nationally certified planner through the American Institute of Certified Planners and has served local government planning and permitting agencies for over 28 years. Her career spans Garrett, Charles, and now Frederick County, so welcome to Frederick, Deborah, leading small to large teams whose job it is to not only plan for smart development, but also to guide applicants through the regulatory requirements involved. Carpenter also had a strong supportive role in the formation of Maryland's first Resilience Authority, the Resilience Authority of Charles County, which you guys are going to hear a lot about in the next couple of minutes here, and served as its chair for just over 2 years. Ms. Carpenter holds a master's degree in geography with a concentration in GIS from West Virginia University and a bachelor's degree in environmental analysis and planning with a minor in biology from Frostburg State University. Come on down.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to see everyone, and I hope we don't have the afternoon lull after a very good meal. So we'll do our best to keep you awake. So my bio mentioned that I served in a strong supportive role for the formation of Maryland's first Resilience Authority. What that really means is I helped bring someone else's vision to life. And that person was the county administrator in Charles County, the last jurisdiction in which I served. And his name is Mark Belton. Mark was fond of saying that resilience authorities are a tool in the county's toolbox that will help them achieve their climate goals. I certainly hope he knows I mean no disrespect as I challenge that notion a bit, especially since he is in the room here today. After having helped form and run an authority, I believe it is much more than a tool. Rather, I see it as the toolbox that houses a suite of tools to be used to further the vision of the authority. So, let's start by talking about the enabling legislation that made authorities possible. SB 457 was passed in 2020. A lot of times on the bills, we skip over the whereas portions as nothing more than introductory fluff. However, they provide the context and the reason for the bill's existence. Here I've highlighted two in particular. Whereas local governments will bear much of the responsibility and cost required to mitigate the impacts of climate change through infrastructure investment, and whereas resilience financing authorities can work in partnership with local governments to accelerate infrastructure financing, reduce the cost of implementation, and mitigate and manage the risks of climate change. Let's highlight a couple things here. First of all, mitigate the impacts of climate change through infrastructure investment. Bear in mind that green banks existed in 2020 when this bill was passed, but traditionally they focused on investment in energy. Part of the impacts of climate change, certainly, especially as it pertains to the strain on the grid caused by rising heat indices and pursuing alternative energy to lower greenhouse gas emissions. But what about other impacts? What about sea level rise, the increase in coastal and urban and nuisance flooding, the damage to public and private infrastructure that happens from the stronger storms with more volume, shoreline erosion, stream restoration, carbon sequestration, etc. So that's not traditionally covered by a green bank. Now, could the authority of a green bank be broadened to include those things? I am sure. We'll hear about that in a moment. And the second thing I want to highlight, though, from this slide is the mention within the authorizing bill that the authority is an instrumentality of local governments. MCEC, who was going to be our other person, the Energy Commission, was formed about 15 years ago as a nonprofit instrumentality of the state. Similar language, right? So the structure of authorities were designed to mirror existing entities, but with a broader mission and more flexibility to meet local needs. In fact, the authors of the bill were intentional about making the legislation flexible and adaptable. Ever heard it said, work smarter, not harder? Yes, I heard that a lot from my father when I was not using the right tool, and he would let me know, and I was causing myself a whole lot more trouble and strain than I needed to. I think that is the position many local governments find themselves in. They want to take on resilience projects. They know they need to do it, but they're trying to do so using only the tools used by government. Those tools don't work because they are limited. Resilience authorities give them access to a shiny new toolbox full of better tools. Let's discuss some of them. Creativity and innovation. An authority is primed and built to be innovative. They can look at creative project management and or financing opportunities that might make a government finance department twitchy. Have you ever seen a twitchy finance department? It happens a lot. Happens a lot. So solutions like revolving loans, P3s, pay for performance models, and combining various sources of funding are all possibilities that rarely get pursued by governments. Partnerships, another tool in the toolbox. It's not that governments can't form partnerships. We often do, but we're limited. I've worked for a government agency for over 28 years now, and no matter how many times I say I'm from the government and I'm here to help, nobody believes me. Authorities deal with a lot of problems that will happen on private property. They have a greater ability to get things done by partnering with non-government entities and citizens because there is not a natural distrust of nonprofits like there is for government. Next tool, pulling experts together. Authorities have an independent board of directors. The brain trust you can pull in that board is exciting. I experienced it with the board of directors in Charles County. The diversity of knowledge in the board created an energy of innovation that fed itself and greatly benefited the cause. It's highly important to put a lot of thought and effort. If you're going to form a resilience authority with a board of directors, put a lot of thought into who you're putting on that board and the range of experiences and knowledge you can pull together. Next tool, efficiency and autonomy. The authority can adopt their own processes, including procurement, and potentially, I know this is going to be a surprise for you, potentially get projects done quicker than government can. I always love that one. Yes. Local governments have a debt ceiling. That's another thing to consider. And that limits the number of projects we can have underway at any given point in time. This also means that projects for resilience are competing with other projects on the capital budget. And let's face it, you need a school, you need the new culvert. What are you going to pay for? You're gonna pay for the school, as it should be. But how are we gonna pay for the resilience projects that also need to be done? This is a way to get it. All right. These last two are my favorites because they were surprises. They're like that extra French fry you find at the bottom of the bag when you thought you were out of French fries. That's what these are. The fifth one, education. Working with schools and with students is one of the easiest, most enjoyable, and yet most impactful projects an authority can undertake. If you want longevity in the authority's existence, if you want buy-in from the community, if you want a pool of passionate volunteers, if you want to make changes that are carried on for years to come, you work with the youth. In Charles County, we stumbled across this with the nexus of Maryland's 5 Million Trees initiative and the governor's service year option. The speed that kind of project got launched, as opposed to launching an infrastructure project, will give you whiplash. And it's so important. It's quick and it's an easy win. And I would recommend any new authority build into their work plan some sort of engagement with the youth and education. And lastly, equity. Historically, though I believe not done maliciously, government's decisions on where to spend their money comes down to money and expediency. What can we get done quickly using the least amount of money? Makes sense logically, right? But the problem is that the locations that are expedient to fix are not often the neighborhoods where our underserved populations live. Those neighborhoods may very well have severe problems, but there may be no cost share opportunities there because they have no HOA, or they have an HOA, but the HOA has no money. There's a distrust of government. So a lot of times there are problems there, but you don't hear from them because they're not going to be the ones to show up and bang down your door. There also are, in those neighborhoods, a lot of language barriers. So even when you talk to them, we're struggling. So all these are likely to lead to difficulty in acquiring easements or even knowing about the issues at all, since they are unlikely to call and complain. So today, we need to be intentional about breaking down those barriers and overcoming those challenges. In Charles County, we were able to incorporate an equity component into a project that prioritized private stormwater projects. It was extremely rewarding. No matter what toolbox you choose, an authority, a green bank, some hybrid of both, or something completely different, if I were to give one piece of advice over all the others, it would be to put people first. Yes, we're trying to save the planet and control climate change, but the impacts of climate change affect every person on this planet. It's negatively affecting our health, our wallets, and our quality of life. If we use the tools to mitigate the impacts that are affecting people, the buy-in and cooperation will follow. And ultimately, the tools will be used by a broader group of people. Thank you.
Do I just take it forward for the next one, or? Okay. Looks like it's a PDF. Okay, thank you very much for that excellent introduction to a resilience authority. I think we'll have a couple of excellent questions for you down the road. But first, I'm going to introduce our second speaker for this afternoon. This is Stephen Morel. He is the CEO of the Montgomery County Green Bank. In this role, he oversees the Green Bank's programs and financial products that are dedicated to drawing in commercial capital and accelerating the climate goals of Montgomery County, Maryland. The Green Bank's mission is to unlock and amplify the benefits of clean energy, energy efficiency, and climate resilience improvements to capital providers, contractors, and most importantly, Montgomery County businesses and residents. Stephen's primary role is to listen to the market feedback and create strategies for the best ways to enable commercial investment at scale. Prior to the Green Bank, Stephen's roles in investment banking research, commercial banking, and international project finance honed a deep interest and skill set in impact investing and blended finance. Originally from Denver, Colorado, Stephen came to the DC area for an undergraduate degree from the George Washington University, where I am also an alum from, as a matter of fact, and a graduate degree from Johns Hopkins University. Please welcome Stephen.
Good afternoon, everybody. Well, thank you so much for having me. Very much appreciate it. And one of my favorite things about going after a really good presentation is sometimes it achieves everything that I want to do already. So I always like to talk about the what, why, and how, and I think that this is all going to sound very familiar to you all because I think it's been answered so very well. So who are we? The Montgomery County Green Bank. I think you heard a little bit about this, but we are a bank, not a real bank though. We are a public-private partnership that's dedicated to accelerating clean energy, energy efficiency, and climate resilient investment in Montgomery County to help accelerate their climate resilient goals. It's a funny kind of institution, not being a bank. I always like to start with that. We don't have an ATM down in the lobby. We're not actually even doing consumer loans. But the reason that it's very helpful to have that moniker out there is that people recognize that a bank is trying to do financial things. And that's exactly how we looked at the problem with accelerating climate resilient and clean energy investment in Montgomery County, was that there was a finance issue, that we needed to think what kind of capital was out there. This was in 2016 that the county council then authorized the Montgomery County Green Bank, and it's developed since then. I came on board in 2020, and as we actually have a fellow green banker from Montgomery County here as well, can attest to, we've been able to really accelerate since then. Like I was starting to mention, we were chartered by the County Council in 2016, but we are an independent 501c3 nonprofit. And I think you heard a little bit about this already. There are a lot of benefits to being a nonprofit that is there for the purpose of government activities, but an independent entity itself, in terms of accelerating the type of activities we do, the type of procurement that we're able to do, as well as the financial instruments that we can actually get out on the ground. We have a board of directors that has supported us since the beginning. Many of the faces that you see here are actually founding members of our board back in 2016. They'll sadly be rolling off soon enough as we have term limits, but we have new board members as well. 2 of our seats come from the county, the Department of Environmental Protection and the Department of Finance, but the rest are independent. And so we really look for a skill set of what these board directors can bring. And you heard a little bit that it is very, very important to think about what your board of directors can bring in advisory. And that's for a couple different reasons. As we started in Montgomery County, there really wasn't much staff. We had 3 people when I started. We're up to 15 now, which is nice, but the board of directors had to take a very active role. So thinking about the type of skill sets that we had there were very helpful. If you see up in the top right, Bert Hunter, secretary, he's actually the chief investment officer of the Connecticut Green Bank. So we were able to get that skill set, skill transfer right away when we first started. We have several governance committees that we created through the board that are also very helpful to think, how do you actually deploy products and programs out in the market that make sense in a way that the whole world can look at and really respect what you're doing. Green banks actually started as national trends outside the United States, created at the government level in UK, in Singapore, Australia, other countries as well. Connecticut Green Bank was the first one, or close to the first one, along with New York Green Bank, established in the United States. And there were others that were then established at the state level. Montgomery County Green Bank was the first one established at the county level. And so there were a lot of eyes on that development. And when you have a lot of eyes on development, particularly in what could be a politically contentious issue, you want to have good governance. And so thinking about that board of directors, thinking about that governance structure has been incredibly helpful to us to expand what we do. Like I mentioned, we're up to 15 people. Actually, as of this morning, we're up to 16 people, which is wonderful. And these are all people that are extremely dedicated within being out in the market as the face of the Green Bank, helping with our programming and everything in the middle of administrative that we would need to do. So we tend to think of the Green Bank as a traditional finance function, a fund out there that's really looking at deploying capital. So we have a lot of functions dedicated towards business development, and that's really key. It ties in with education, as you've already heard about, that not a lot of businesses, not a lot of residents out there understand what is the economic value proposition of investing in clean energy. And then even if they do, they're not actually certain how a financing strategy is going to help them get there. And so we help build the market. We help develop the market in addition to offering financial tools out there. And so I call that business development here, but it's really educating and building a market as well. And so what we do, if we can help educate the market and people realize, hey, there's actually projects I can do, things I want to invest in, then we can help fill in the market gap when there is a market gap on financing solutions. And that's the origination side. We manage that portfolio, and we manage it in a, I would say, very sophisticated and prudent manner for what was originally started as taxpayer resources that then we built up into a financial portfolio. And then, of course, finance and admin to actually run the Green Bank. So the purpose of Green Bank funding, as I mentioned, we accelerate clean energy, energy efficiency, and with respect to climate resilience, indeed, there are a lot of green banks out there that are not filling this function. So much that it took note of the county council just this past calendar year to say, hey, we love what Charles County is doing. We love what these other entities are doing. We'd like to add that to your authorization as well. So we're not an official resilience authority in the same kind of legislative sense that you saw earlier, but we do resilience activities, which I think is important. But that was one that was not actually added until just this year. But we do that by leveraging private sector investment, and I'll get more onto that in just a minute. We had our initial capitalization from a merger of two utilities that had a ratepayer settlement, and that ratepayer settlement came to each county, and the counties said, what do we want to do with it? Some did specific projects that they had related to paying back towards the ratepayers, and in Montgomery County, they said, well, we want to actually start a green bank. So that was a wonderful initial capitalization to get us started. We then had an additional appropriation law that was passed called the energy tax receipts for us. Energy tax law, or the energy tax itself in Montgomery County, is a tax on fossil fuel suppliers coming into the county. And so we now by law get 10% of that coming to us on an annual basis, and that's what's really helped us accelerate. As we are successful, theoretically, that money should go down over time as well. No dedicated funding to our climate resilience yet, because that's an area that we're working on. And I'll go into more detail. I'm happy to answer questions on this. This is a kind of complex slide of how we think about financial leverage from the private market. We do all sorts of various structures, from credit enhancements like loan loss reserves and guarantees, to co-lending and different types of co-lending structures, down to syndications and things that we can actually draw in and sell off parts of our portfolio as well, and then securitizations and other activities on the secondary markets to gain leverage. So we have several programs out there. Most of our focus is in the commercial sector. This includes areas in power purchase agreements for renewable energy, direct purchase of renewable energy, commercial PACE, the property assessed clean energy, as well as we work on a lot of tailored products as well. On the residential side, we work through other organizations on energy efficiency financing, renewable energy. Our Access Solar program is our low-income solar program that has both purchase as well as PPA options. And then we have a technical assistance program out there dedicated to helping people figure out what they need to do to become more energy efficient, how they actually install energy efficiency, and think about those measures related to ash rate audits, feasibility studies, and other design work. So I will stop there, and thank you very much for your time. Looking forward to more of the chat.
Check. Oh. Talk directly into the microphone, they said. Okay, well, thank you guys both for some very interesting presentations, some similarities, some differences. So we're going to have a Q&A session. If you are interested in asking a Q, you can see the microphones being lined up right there. There's, I think, going to be another one on the other side if you just want to sort of line up, and we'll go through them. But I'm going to start us off. Excuse me. And, you know, the name of this event is Mobilize Frederick, right? So how do we mobilize things, right? And I think in both of your stories here, that's where I want to sort of pull out a little bit more. So like Deborah, you mentioned this county administrator who had this vision, and there was this bill that was passed, right? But that's not the whole story, right? So in a couple of minutes, perhaps, I don't, right? Can you know, how did that actually turn into an actual thing?
Now, hi. Now, you can hear me. All right. So let's get real. So when things happen in politics, it's because there's a political will to do so, right? So it went beyond the county administrator, and it went to, it's a commissioner form of government in Charles County. So they were behind it. The reason they were behind it was because they were getting a lot of phone calls about flooding. I used to say that every time that I heard the pitter-patter of raindrops, it was not a soothing sound for me, because I knew the next day I would come in and there would be a ton of phone calls. The problem with the government was that a lot of these problems were older neighborhoods that predated stormwater regulations, and so none of their infrastructure could handle the size of the storm events that were coming in. And it put government in a really bad position because we don't do work on private lands. It's just, there's a lot of liability. It's very difficult. We can do it, but then you've got to go into easement agreements, and it's very difficult. Plus, as I said, then those projects compete with capital. So the idea of the Resilience Authority, what really drove that was stormwater. And that was our first project. And then, of course, it branched out from there, but that was the impetus.
Great. You've got to find your spark somewhere, right? So similar question for you, Stephen. You know, you mentioned how the Green Bank, you know, the county council gave you your charter, right? And so before we all march down to our county council's offices and demand a Green Bank here, what exactly are we asking for if we do decide to ask for a Green Bank? What are the steps that we are asking to be put in place?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think that it's actually relatively simple now that you have examples that you can point to. And it's probably very difficult when you don't have the examples to point to. But from my perspective, mobilization is about demonstration. You know, just from a purely financial perspective, clean energy is actually pretty easy because you look at the life stream of money that you can save off of doing it versus the present, you know, and take a present value of all that compared to the investment that you'll put in today, and you can see that there's a net gain. There's legislation right now proposed in Montgomery County on building energy performance standards at the state level as well. And if you read the technical studies about these, you see, yes, there's an investment that needs to be made, but again, the savings are just far, far greater. And so when you think about the capabilities that you can provide to your businesses and residents off of all of that savings, it's just almost like a no-brainer for a lot of politicians out there. So I think that that was particularly compelling at the time that we were being created, again, because we were just focused on energy efficiency and clean energy at first. It becomes a harder story when you think of other things like avoiding disasters and how you actually look at the financial scenario for that. But for clean energy, I think it was relatively straightforward for the council to think about.
Great, thank you. So I'll ask one more and then we'll come to the folks in the crowd here. So, you know, you made a great point that it's much easier to do it once there's an example in place, right? You can point to it and say, here, this worked. Another great thing about having examples in place is that you can learn from the challenges that those examples ran into. So I'm curious, and I'll start with you, Deborah. You know, what was a roadblock that you ran into when we were putting together this Resilience Authority, and how can we, if we were to go down that same road in Frederick, avoid that or manage it?
One of the biggest hurdles was we were brand new. So it's all great to be the first out of the gate to do something and be cutting edge, but you usually bleed a little bit when you do it. And that was really the case. So how do you create something that's never been created before when the legislation to create it was very flexible on purpose without overstepping your bounds? And oh, by the way, I'm from the government, I've always been from the government, so I've never run a nonprofit before. And how do you keep the nonprofit parallel with a government mission without crossing into it? That was probably the most difficult, to realize that a resilience authority is to support the mission of the government. It's not to do the government's work. And there was confusion on both sides. Right? Who does what? And like the idea of, oh, we do hazard mitigation. Well, now the Resilience Authority can do it. No, that's not what it's for. And, you know, Jack's smiling about that out in the crowd because we know. So it was an education thing on both the government side and on the public side, and it was a brand new thing. So you learn by trial and error, and you just bleed a little bit. I think Frederick County is in a unique position that because they're not new and they can look at all the different models and pick what is best for them.
It's a great spot to be in, right? All right, so Stephen, same question for you, right? You were a little bit cutting edge. There was a little bit of bleed probably somewhere. What was that like for you? What did you run into, and how did you overcome it?
So I think that the hardest part that we really encountered for years at a time was demonstrating to the market what we could do. The local business market, you know, C&I loans out there, commercial real estate loans, it's a very sophisticated market. And there are banks that are doing this, there are national players, local players, and to try and upset the apple cart, as it seemed like they were trying to get us to do, was hard to get it out there. And you need those examples for people to be able to see themselves in order to make more headway. And when we didn't have those examples, it was a challenge. So much that the stakeholders really held back for as long as they could. From that initial capitalization to when we got the energy tax, I think was 4 years, 3.5 years, 4 years, because we would, and I remember going into one of the council members' offices, and he brought up the old Wendy's commercial. He said, well, where's the beef? You know, you need to show me the deals. I love the promise of a green bank, but you can't just talk about the promise of a green bank. And that was a challenge because the promise was too broad. You could do so many things that people just couldn't see themselves in it. So once we started to get deals done, once we were able to actually get some deals done with local partners, where the other local partners could say, oh, I see, this isn't competition to what we're doing, this is actually how we add to what we're doing, then it started to snowball.
Excellent. All right.
Thank you. I guess this question's for Ms. Carpenter. Regarding the Resilience Authority, Frederick County is, you know, the fastest growing county in the state right now, so it occupies a unique position of having more development challenges. Now, when considering the flooding, and we saw the picture of Ellicott City this morning and the cars floating by, and you mentioned a culvert in your presentation, what would it look like to have a Resilience Authority enforcing stormwater management specs and details that are more current than state law? And how would that integrate with a planning commission or development review? What would that look like?
there's a lot of flexibility in how you work things, but I'll just give you the example that happened in Charles County. So like I said, the first project we did was stormwater to fix some of those issues. We used ARPA money, and we set that aside. But the ARPA money was not the Resilience Authority's money, it was the county's money. So what the Resilience Authority did was a prioritization based on the severity of the problem, based on dual benefits, like State Highway needs some MS4 credits, the county needs some MS4 credits. If we can fix this problem right here, then we get more bang for our buck. But also equity, that equity component that I told you about. So we did a dashboard, we did this analysis, and we said, all right, here are the over 100 places, and we're going to do here, 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 and here in this order. Handed it back to the county. The county used the ARPA funds and came up with a process for doing that. Therefore, it was back in the hands of the regulators who do enforce the code and make sure that it handles all of that. Now, that doesn't mean a resilience authority can't do their own projects, but a resilience authority would have to follow the same codes and regulations that anyone else would have to follow. But because they're partners with the county, they're intimately involved with that.
Thank you.
All right, if there are any other questions, just come on right up to the mics, and, oh, we got one right here.
Hello. Hey, I'm Josh. I'm also with the Green Bank. I was here for the earlier session on climate equity, and this question's for Steve. Could you speak to how the Green Bank can help promote or accelerate climate justice and equity? Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Josh. That's very much a plant question. Josh is actually an even earlier employee of the Green Bank than I am, so he knows exactly what we're doing. But this is a really great question, and it's important to think about in this particular environment. So you've all watched the Inflation Reduction Act, the amount of tax credits that are available from that, the amount of money flowing down through green banks and green bank-like entities. There are billions of dollars of liquidity being entered into a market now. And from my perspective, what's very important is that we think about how we can promote a just transition with all that money. It's not going to go to just increase the share value of a couple of large developers out there, which it may to an extent, which is fine, as long as we actually really keep that focus on equity. So it really is our pretty much number 2 priority, almost call it 1.5 relative to the climate goals that we have, because if we're not doing if we're not deploying our capital in a just way, then what are we actually promoting out there? So the county it has a set of definitions based off of the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments they call equity emphasis areas. And so we have a target to get at least 20% of our deployment in those equity emphasis areas. Now that we're layering on the federal monies as well, they have a target to get 40% of that deployment in what they call J40 or Justice 40 areas. What we've found, I just was looking at the statistics this morning, 61% of our portfolio has been in both J40 and EEA areas. So we really do keep that focus quite a bit. And just understand that a focus on equity is a focus on making a transition across the whole county. We don't discriminate against the types of customers we want to work with. We want everybody to embrace the clean energy transition. But we have to think about specialized tools for specialized areas that may have had a history of underinvestment, that may have a geographic focus that's ignored by traditional banking out there, and see how we can help with that. So we have some of these funding targets based off of EEAs and what they call the CGS map on the federal level, but we're always going to be trying exceeding that.
Stephen, I wonder, just because Lynn was not able to make it, but you're pretty familiar with her and her organization, can you maybe give a couple minutes on what they do, how they're different from you and Deborah's efforts?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it is sad that, unfortunately, Lynn couldn't make it today, but she's with the Climate Access Fund, which is purely focused on community solar. And we've done community solar at the Green Bank as well, and it's a wonderful instrument. So very happy to talk about it. That, there are a lot of folks out there that don't have the capacity to put solar up on their own roofs, if you live in an apartment, if you have a funky roof, even if you own, being able to access community solar, meaning that you are directly accessing a system that's within the utility service zone in which you sit, is a wonderful opportunity to overcome that. But community solar is interesting even more so as an equity benefit out there. The history, I guess, in the United States of community solar actually began from the idea that there will be a bunch of people that own a system collectively. And then that model started to evolve and say, well, why don't we own a system collectively and we sell subscriptions, pieces of this, where you can offset that power if your utility has that capability to give you that net metering off of the power that you would get from that. And then the model developed even further to say, all right, well, now I'm a for-profit developer, but I'm still going to go sell out all of these subscriptions out there. And it's a balance game between what type of economics you would get of having that system versus what type of benefit you can give in pricing to those subscribers of the energy. And if you mold those concepts together and provide the deepest discounts that you can to energy, then you can really target low and moderate income communities, other communities that otherwise have a very high energy burden, and be able to help reverse that kind of energy burden. So from my perspective, community solar is a wonderful mechanism. We've financed a couple different types. Some have residential subscribers, as I was talking about, in like apartment buildings, but others that even have business subscribers. Thinking about, for example, a office park, where the office park owner can put a solar system up and then provide subscriptions down to the tenants within the office park. You know, that's key for them as well as potential small businesses.
Excellent, thank you. There's a question up here?
Yes, there are new incentives or new opportunities around transferable tax credits, which opens up various things that are tax-based incentives to nonprofits and others. Does this play into the work that a green bank does today, and if so, how?
Just to take a first stab at this is a very emerging and developing trend. The tax credits were extended under the Inflation Reduction Act. The ability to have direct pay for nonprofits was something that was new as well. So we're working along with a lot of other green banks through the U.S. to figure out what is the value add here. Again, we're not trying to displace the market as a green bank, we're trying to add to it. One of the areas that I think there's a lot of value add that we're working at Montgomery County Green Bank to kick off is a bridging product. Even if you are able to get an elective pay as a nonprofit, you may not get it for 9 months, 18 months or so, and you still don't have the capital to outlay at the beginning. Well, then we can bridge that as a financial product. So I think we'll start to see a lot of bridge financing out there to help with credits. Other green banks, entities, including Climate Access Fund, Lynn's group, are looking to utilize those economics themselves so that they can then provide a deeper discount in what inures down to the subscribers or to the end users. If we, for example, have a power purchase agreement and we're able to collect a tax credit off of it, which we as a nonprofit would also take as a direct pay, but then we can offer a lower discount or a deeper discount on the pricing of that electricity, then that's a big benefit as well. So I think that we'll see a lot of benefit there. In terms of the purely taxable entities that can transfer, I think that there's going to be a very regular market, and you'll probably see a lot less of green banks involved in that, but you'll see a lot of higher end institutions of private equity and other folks that are really looking to combine a lot of these tax credits. It's a simpler market than the world used to be on tax equity. Those were always very complicated financing structures. So it will now be easier for larger businesses to kind of aggregate all of the tax credits from other folks, but certainly a developing area.
Deborah, anything you want to add on that?
No, I keep the financing people in charge of that stuff.
Smart move. Yes, please.
Hi. Thanks, you guys, for being here today. One of the things that we did when we were writing the Climate Response and Resilience Report that was submitted to the County Council and City Aldermen was we did a focus group of county mayors. There's 11 different jurisdictions in Frederick County who have either a burgess or a mayor. And 3 of those mayors, when they participated in the focus group, they could not talk enough about stormwater and what a emergency it created for people that lived in their communities and how difficult it was to respond, especially when people were already living in historic homes and were having a hard time keeping them updated. Some of these were low-income residents. Their homes were, of course, in areas where there was no stormwater infrastructure. And the mayor said, every time it rains, I grit my teeth. That was one quote that we put in the report. And they just can't help their residents. And they were looking for a way to help residents. And Deborah, it sounded like a resilience authority is a great tool for that. Could you explain more about that and whether or not it's applicable?
I can't tell you whether or not it's applicable because I'm not sure how the infrastructure gets taken over. So what made it possible in Charles County is the idea that we could use these funds. Resilience Authority prioritizes and says this is where you need to spend your funds, government. And so we could go in there and we could negotiate with the help of the Resilience Authority because they're a more trusted entity than the government for easements for that access to the stormwater infrastructure. That could go well, it could not go well, but that's why the Resilience Authority was so important because they were a more trusted entity. After we gained the easements, then that infrastructure became part of the county inventory. And so maintenance into perpetuity became the county's. So that is something that the county would have to commit to, and I can't speak for my county now that I'm here, can't speak for any of the mayors and burgesses, but somebody has to take ownership of that infrastructure. Now in Charles County, whenever there was anything new, it was automatic that was part of the process. You signed over the infrastructure and this is not a problem. It's the older developments that had that problem and they had to agree to hand over easements so that the county could take over the infrastructure.
Great. Next.
When I was on the Sustainability Commission, the county was going to make C-PACE loans available, and I really insisted on being the first one in the county to do it. We put in a $214,000 solar array and some other objects. But my question is this. I've always had this idea that if we have storm events and increasing storm events with power outages, I always thought that solar on school buildings, not all of them necessarily, but some that could form as a refuge hub. You know, some of these communities are out of power for extended periods of time. No one has a place to be warm or to have a hot meal, and schools would be an ideal place to do it. Although the schools had it's been sort of proposed to FCPS, and they kind of went, yeah, I don't know if we can afford it. What kind of role could green banks help? And then obviously it's got to be led by FCPS. If they don't ask you for the money, then you're not going to give it to them or work with them. But I think it's really critical that as we look at some climate emergencies that are going to be happening, that we have some energy resilient hubs that can endure extended power outages, and it always seemed to me like schools would be the ideal place to start. So is this something that you guys could facilitate, and is there some way we can collaborate with the school system to make that happen?
Sure, I'll tack on to this one. So there's a concept called resilience hubs that is very interesting. So when I've got nothing else to do in my spare time, sometimes I think about, what fits Frederick County? Is it a resilience hub? Is it a green bank? Is it a hybrid? Is it a resilience authority? And I really like the idea of resilience hubs. So for those of you who don't know what they are, I think of it as a smaller scale, but more holistic approach that's has a strong emphasis on social equity. So it finds those neighborhoods where you do have your underserved populations. It establishes a hub that in the event of an emergency, there is some place that they can get resources, they can get education, they can survive the emergency, whatever it is, because those populations are less likely to be able to recover from those sorts of situations. So I think that a resilience hub is a really good idea, and resilience authorities and green banks together, because energy has to be part of it, and I think that's the way to go. And it's not holistic for the whole county, but it does target some of those needs that you mentioned.
All right. Well, another one? Nope.
Can I
Another
just
two?
add one
Yeah, go for it.
additional thought on the resiliency hubs in particular? As a green bank, but even just as an individual financier, I would finance resiliency hubs every day. It's so simple. We've done a couple of private institutions, multifamily properties that are getting solar, they're getting storage, they're available during power outages for the community, for people to have plug load if they need to charge their phones, if they need to store medicines that need to be refrigerated, also have other resources. One that we just did in Tacoma Park, we will have a ribbon cutting in May, early May, if you're willing to come down to Tacoma Park. We would love to see people there. Just keep an eye out for some announcements from us. But these are so critical to have those resources available for the community, and it shocks me that as we think about these today, why have they not been financed more over time? And I can't answer that question because, like I said, I'm shocked, just as other people are as well. Schools are a wonderful avenue for this, and so we know of many folks in the school system taking a look at resiliency hubs, but they're looking at also deferred maintenance. They're looking at other critical issues that, prioritization definitely has taken an effect with the school system. Montgomery County as a government in particular, though, has definitely highlighted these, and it's for government facilities. It makes a lot of sense relatively easily as well. You all may remember that there was a small plane that flew into the grid, I guess about 6 months ago. They had to shut off the entire grid to rescue this individual, but the dog shelter, which is a resiliency hub, was the only place that was actually working in the entire area, and so people actually did go and use it. So they work well as well.
Okay, we have 1 minute left, and we have two, so this is lightning round, people.
Hi, I'm Joshua Long from Multi-Faith Alliance for Climate Stewards and Interfaith Power and Light. We love green banks. We love Montgomery County Green Bank. So my question actually is twofold. It's what projects do you think people should be focusing on right in the immediate that are easy grabs, whether it's for faith communities and for educational institutions, being that we're out of college now? And then what projects are more so do you see we need to be thinking about more long-term in the future?
Lightning round answers.
Just very quickly, I would say focus on the communities that you have the most impact in your community. It could be faith-based institutions, it could be school, kind of depends on your geography, but those that you see that biggest impact are the best ones.
And I'm just agreeing with that because it's about the people. Find out what their problem is and go solve it.
Excellent. Last question.
I have to apologize for my naivete or ignorance. I don't know very much about either resilience authorities or green banks yet, but I'm wondering what portion of your projects, or would you look at projects that have actually to do with land management? I'm thinking either a large private landowner like a conservancy or a park authority, putting in supporting the development of pervious paving or pervious walkways, all to handle water issues.
Just very quickly, very little for us right now, but like I mentioned, climate resilience is a new part of our authority, so we're trying to learn.
And for us, the board of directors chooses the priorities, and the priorities are based on the needs of the community. And so it would end up being one of the buckets that you look at, and where it ranks, I don't know, but that will be up to the board of directors.
Thank you guys very much. I learned a lot. Hope you guys did too.